Alright, so we got an '04 Dodge Neon or Srt4. Gonna put a clutch in it and also a timing belt. This video will be on the clutch. I'm not sure how in depth this video is going to be because I'm kind of want to get this done. It takes a long time to film it, but I'll try to film the highlights of it. Usually what I start out on these is I'll pull the battery of this air intake and kind of get down to the transmission, pull the wheels off and pull the axles out, and kind of go from there. So the first thing I do is I'll pull out this air intake in this battery and get access to the transmission here. Alright, once you get the battery out of the way, you got to remove this battery tray. It's all 10 millimeters, 4 at each end, and then you have a tin that holds this on with a nut. So you'll pull this off, and that'll expose the transmission mount, get you closer to where you need to be to start taking things off. So intake and the battery tray, and that gives you pretty good access to start taking things off. Alright, usually the next thing I do is remove the shift linkage. You have some circlips, 2 of them. They look like this. If I can get my finger out of the way. Just take a small screwdriver and pull those out. And then there's these little bushes on the side there. They'll probably stay in there, but I take them out anyway because if they fall out, then you gotta go looking for them. And with all the movement, taking the transmission out and everything, it's possible for them to fall out. So I just take them out. You don't have to, but I usually do. So these are out of the way, and then we'll have to get them loose from the bracket in the back to release them from the transmission. And then I'll probably go over this way and pull this intercooler line off, maybe the throttle body here, to get to the transmission bolts up top. Alright, so your shift cables are held on by these two. They're back in there. I can't really show it to you. They're back in there. They go in the shift cable goes in the bracket, and this slides on top of them and locks them in. I just take a big pry bar and I pry these up slowly, and they'll work themselves loose. There's one on each bracket, so you'll have 2 of these, or no, one on each cable, not bracket. So you'll have 2 of these you got to pull off, and then those cables should pull free from the transmission, and then when you drop it down, it shouldn't hang them up. Alright, so I went ahead and moved the throttle body because you have a few bolts back here you have to get to. Throttle body's in the way. Throttle body has 2 10 millimeter bolts. Has a few TPS and idle air and all that hooked to it, electrical. And you have your throttle cable, which on your throttle cable, what you want to do is open your, what I usually do is open my throttle body, throttle all the way open. And that gives a lot of slack on your cable. And then you just bring your cable around this opening right here, and it should slide out. And then this is attached. This little plastic thing is what holds the throttle cable to this cable. Just put something like a small screwdriver in here and push on it, and that'll release that out. So then you can pull this off, and that'll allow you to get to the starter bolts or some of the other bolts up top. That would be a little more challenging if you didn't remove it. So I'll probably go ahead and start on removing some of these bolts up here, and then I'll move to the bottom, get the axles out, and get it going. Alright, so I already took out some of the transmission to engine mount, or engine bolts. Those are 18. So those are out on the top. There's no worry of it falling out because there's still a bunch of them on the bottom. Then you have 3 of these 15s that go in the starter. 2 of them go in this direction towards the transmission, or towards the engine, and then there's one that goes to the transmission. And then there's this little bracket here that holds the starter pretty firm against the transmission. I went ahead and took it out because you know, I don't want the starter interfering with my transmission coming in or out. So I took this out. You may only have to loosen it just to give the starter some slack. But I didn't disconnect the starter. It's still up in there. It's just you know, hanging freely. There's no reason to take it completely out. It's not pulling hard on the wires or anything. So we're pretty close to being done up here. What we can do, I mean, obviously got to take the transmission mount out and stuff, but what I'll probably do next usually is pull the axles out. Sometimes you can leave the axles in and pull the transmission in. I'm not going to do that. It's easier just to pull them out. It only takes a few minutes. Either way, you have to take them out of, you have to release them from the wheel bearings and stuff. So we'll go ahead and do that next, and then start getting the stuff underneath and get this mount out, and then it should pull out. You know, something like this, it's just a lot of little stuff that holds it in. But anyway, we'll pull the axles out next. Alright, first thing we'll do is remove this axle nut. So just remove this cotter pin, and then we have this axle nut here. So we'll remove that first, and then we'll hit the ball joint. And I'll show you a trick on, I don't know if it's a trick, but it's something that I always do when removing axles. If you haven't done it before, you know, it's a good way to get to remove them. Alright, this nut is probably a 32 or 1 1/4. I use a 1 1/4. I think they're 32 also, or that's converts to millimeter close to it. So you just take that nut off, and then the axle should be pretty loose. Make sure you can push it in. If you can't push it in, then I would put this nut back on there and just kind of tap on it a little bit until it comes loose. Usually they push in. Sometimes they can be stubborn. Sometimes they can be really, really stubborn, and then we have a special tool that gets them off if they're like that. But this one pushes in, so that'll come out no problem. So next thing we'll do is we'll pull out that ball joint bolt, lower the control arm, and get this axle out of the hub here. Alright, so underneath there you have your ball joint, you have this bolt that goes through it. This is a 15, and then, or this is the 15, and then this is a 18, I believe. Just get your impact, take this out. Normally, you have to tap on the knuckle to get it loose. This one came right out, which is nice. Sometimes these pinch bolts, they come out easier than the other ones that are pressed, like almost forced in, pressed in. And then what I do is I put a pry bar, and I hit this hole right here, put that end in there, and just pry down on this. And then this comes loose. You know, you pull it down far enough to clear the ball joint. So now we'll just pull this axle out, which I don't know if I can do with one hand. Yes, I can. So now the axle's out. You just release it from here. So now what we're going to do is go under there, and I'll show you how I get these axles out. It's pretty easy. And then we'll go on the other side. The other side's got a carrier bearing, I think. On the passenger side, I think it's got a longer axle. It's got a carrier bearing. And you have to take that out, but you have to be careful because the oil cooler's there, and if anything touches that oil cooler, it'll break. And don't ask me how I know this on these SRTs. I just do. So you gotta be very careful with those stupid oil coolers under there. Anyway, we'll take this out, and then I'll show you how to get the passenger side out. All right, we're out of the rocket here. This is where the axle goes into your transmission. And I've been doing this for years, never had a problem with it. Works really good. Take a pickle fork and press it against the axle, and then put the other end, you know, brace it against the transmission, and just tap it, and it'll come out. You don't have to go crazy on it. You know, there's special tools. They have like the slide hammer tool. You can put it in there. But I've been using this. I've been doing this for probably 25, 30 years, using the pickle fork trick, and it works well. So, you know, just get it in there, and you know, just tap on this end of it, and it'll tap out. I can't really hold the camera and show you, but I'll tap it and then I'll show you, and it'll 99.9% of the time they'll tap right out, no problem. Once in a while you get one that's really seized in there, but in general that's how you get them out. Alright, so I tapped it out. It literally probably 3 or 4 little baby taps, and it came right out. Now these transmissions, these particular transmissions, the Srt4, hold about 4 quarts of oil. So you'll lose some out of your axle holes, obviously. Get yourself a drain pan. Now, all you want to do to remove the axle is just grab a hold of it on one hand on each end and just guide it out slowly. Try not to catch the boot on anything so you don't tear it or anything. And they should slide out real easy. So I'm going to slide this one out, and then we'll hit this passenger side. Alright, so I got lucky on the other side, and it popped out. This one didn't want to pop out, so I got this ball joint separator in here. And what you do is you just put it in, you cup it against around the ball joint and then tighten it and it pulls it loose. So this one's loose. There's several ways to do that. I tried first tapping the side of your spindle here. A lot of times that'll release them, but this thing was real stubborn, didn't want to release that way. And then the more caveman way is a pickle fork. The problem with the pickle fork is you will damage the boot, and then you have to replace the ball joint. This doesn't damage the boot, so this is the best option if you do have it seized up and you tried, tapping on the spindle and it still didn't come out. Then the next best option is this here. OTC makes it. I'm not sure how much it was because I bought it in a kit with a bunch of other stuff. But it's very handy. It doesn't always get in like I'd like to sometimes, but on these Neons it went right in and pulled it right out. So it's a good investment. I don't know if they rent these or not. If you buy it separate, it's probably not super expensive. But anyway, the only other way I know would be a pickle fork, and you'll definitely damage your rubber boot if you do that. So it's best not to do that if you can help it. So anyway, now we'll just get this, we'll separate the hub here from the lower A-arm like we did on the other side and get this axle out. Alright, on these Neons, this has like this is the passenger side axle that has an intermediate shaft. To get this axle out, you have to take, I think it's 2, I'll double check, but pretty sure there's 2 bolts that hold the 2 axles, 2 pieces, to a bracket on the block, 13 millimeter. And I usually take a long extension and get those loose. So I'm going to take those out, and then I'll kind of show you what the situation is underneath after I get those out. So anyway, you can get through the wheel well here to get them out, I'm pretty sure. It's been a while since I've done one of these. The other thing on these Srt4s, these aren't the normal Neon axles on here. They're heavy duty. So this is kind of getting off the subject a little bit, but if you have an Srt4 and you get, they're real susceptible to axle wobble. So you'll be like going along and your steering wheel will kind of wobble. A lot of times it's your axles. They get pretty, with the amount of power these cars put down and the boost and everything, they'll tear up an axle pretty quick. So what I always recommend is just go to AutoZone and get the lifetime axles. There's real heavy duty axles online you get for each cars. The problem with that is if you don't break the axle, then you're going to break something inside the transmission. So it really depends on what your build is or what you're going for. If you have a stock transmission, I would not put the aftermarket heavy duty axles in there. I would get the AutoZone heavy duty axles. They have a lifetime warranty on them. You snap them, take them back. They'll replace them, and they won't hurt your normally they won't hurt your transmission. So that's just a little side note on these Srt4s and their axles. These are not the normal. These are heavier duty than the normal non-turbo 4-cylinder axles or normal Neon. So if you have a mild build, if you have an axle problem, just go to AutoZone and get the lifetime warranty ones and swap them out. It only takes half hour or whatever, and I think it's a lot cheaper than the now of course if you got a stage 2 or stage 3 transmission and all that good stuff, then go for it. But if your car is still stock or pretty mild, mild build, and you don't want to replace transmission every time the car hooks up, go ahead and get the AutoZone one. So anyway, it's a little off the subject, but anyway, we will take this axle out. I'll show you. I'll get underneath there, get these 2 bolts out, and show you a little more on it. Alright, so here's the situation under here. Kind of very close to it. Anyway, here's that. If I can get the light over here. Here's that carrier bearing, and that is bolted to this bracket on the block. There's only 2 bolts to hold it, so you can see now it's loose. Here's the 2 bolts. That's where the 2 bolts go through. And those are the bolts. Oh, my light went out. I'm going to have to go, hold on, I have to go change. Alright, so I got the light back on. Now I got snow dripping into my eyes. Having technical difficulties here today. Man. So one thing I hate about working on cars, especially in the snow, is all the crack dripping in your face. So, you know, this is loose, and this will pull out now. And this is the oil cooler I was talking about. Be very careful around this thing. This thing is very fragile. And don't ask me how I know this, but if you even nick this thing with something, it'll start leaking. Really, and the other thing with it is if you nick it and have to replace it, Mopar redesigned it, and it's got, you have to change all these lines into it too, because they changed the size of them. So the best thing to do is just not damage it in any way. It's not too hard to change if it happens, but it's fairly expensive, and it's not just a matter of changing, taking these hoses off anymore. They want you to change. They have different sizes, so they, now my phone's going off. So they want you to change the hoses too. It's a bigger pain. So don't get anything around this that you're going to strike or hit. Now I already started pulling this out. It just pulls straight out. There was no issues with this side. So what I'll do, I can't show it on camera. This is driving me nuts. Every time I get under here, somebody's calling me, or light goes out, or I got snow dripping in my eye. Anyway, I'm going to go ahead and pull this axle straight out, and we'll get it out, and then the axles will be out of the way. And that's all there is really to it. Just on this side, be careful with this. You don't want to nick it, and you got to take these out, these two bolts out, before it'll pull out. So, and you can see it's quite a bit longer than the other side, so that's why it's got this intermediate shaft in here. So anyway, get these out, and then we'll move on. All right, when you see the, we're taking the slave cylinder out, that'll be up in there. You'll see this. Just take a screwdriver and pry this out gently. It's plastic, so be careful with it. And then you just kind of rotate the slave cylinder towards you a little bit until it unlocks off of there. There's kind of a slot in the transmission right here. So anyway, that's how that comes out, and then just kind of move it out of the way. So now we'll hit this bracket here that bolts the transmission to the block. There's some bolts up there, some bolts here, and then we'll start going around taking all the bolts out, and then we'll put a jack under it and take out the mount. Alright, so this is up there. You'll see it when you get up there. There's 3 bolts that hold us to the block. There's 1, 2, 3. Take those out first, because this one here blocks, or this one here blocks one of the bolts that goes towards the transmission. And then you got 2 that go towards the transmission. One on this side of the bracket and one on this side. Those are 18 mil. They got to come out. It's a little awkward, but with the right use of extensions and stuff, you can get to it. So anyway, we'll move on to the back side and take those bolts out. I don't remember how many is on the back side, but anyway, we'll get to that, and then get a jack under it and take the mount out, and that should drop out. So on the next, all right, you got one more bolt that goes from the engine to the transmission, and you almost have to remove the oil filter to get to it. Otherwise, you're not, unless you're going to sit there with an open end, and then I still don't think you'd be able to get it all the way out, because this intercooler tube runs around from the turbo up, it blocks it. So just remove your oil filter and take that bolt out. And you can see here I got a gap now between the engine and the transmission. So I'm pretty sure all the bolts are out from the engine to the transmission, and everything's loose. So I'm going to put a transmission jack under this and go to that top mount and take it off, and then we'll see if there's anything else. You double check and make sure nothing else is holding on anytime. So that'll be the next thing. We'll get the jack under it and loosen that transmission mount on the top. Alright, so I got a tranny jack under the transmission, and what you want to do is take this little plastic plug right here, take that off with the screwdriver, and then there's that bolt right there. That's your transmission mount, so we'll run that out, and that should drop this transmission pretty low. Start lowering it down, but I mean, obviously before you do that, make sure you have the transmission on a jack so it doesn't just fall out. So anyway, we'll take that bolt out right there, and then we'll start lowering this thing down. Alright, after a little bit of finagling, I got it out. One thing I forgot to take off was the speedometer here. There's a pigtail for that. There's a red clip You just push the right clip over and then snap it off. And then the power steering lines will be a little bit in the way. I just took them loose from the engine there, not on the pump or anything, but just where they bolt to the bottom of the oil pan there. I just took that loose and kind of finagled it out of there. It's pretty tight on this side to get it out, but once you get it, the lines out, it'll come out. It's just a little bit of finagling. So next thing we'll do is take this pressure plate and clutch out, and the flywheel. His new clutch kit, he got a south bend clutch kit, and it comes with the flywheel. So we won't have to get that turned or anything. But anyway, we'll take the pressure plate and clutch off, take a look at it anyway, and then take the flywheel off the engine. And you got a new fork for the transmission, throw out bearing, of course. So we'll put those in, and then we'll work on just reassembling it. But for now, we'll there's some bolts to take that out, and then we'll take a look at that clutch. The car drove in fine, so I'm not sure why he's changing the clutch. I didn't ask him, and I didn't drive it, so it could be slipping. I'm not sure, or it could be just wanting to put a south bend clutch there. I'm not really, like I said, I'm not sure. I didn't ask. So I'm not even sure how many miles are on this car actually. So anyway, we'll get that off, and we'll take a look at it on the bench. Alright, so I misspoke a little bit. This has got one of those stupid modular clutches. So you can see here, the pressure plate doesn't have any bolts that bolt to like a conventional flywheel because they're pop riveted in. So this is all one piece. What they want you to do is put this whole unit on the transmission first, and then put it up in there. I don't particularly like the design. It's called modular. We've had non-modular for decades, and it worked great, and it's easier to service. With this kind of clutch here, you can't even, which I wouldn't recommend anyway, but say your clutch was out and you wanted to keep your pressure plate, you can't even do that because this is riveted in. But anyway, what you need to do to get these bolts, it has 4 bolts hooked to the flywheel, and they go from the engine side to the transmission side. So you have to end up taking this out, which is covers the flywheel, where you wouldn't be able to get to the bolts anyway. So there's 2 bolts to hold this. Once you loosen the power steering lines and the intercooler box or whatever, and you got to pull this down. Once you pull that down, you can get to the bolts on this side. Let's see if I can get a picture of it. Yeah. So there's 4 bolts like this that hold this unit to the flywheel, almost like a automatic transmission torque converter. This is how it's kind of set up. So anyway, you just pull these 4 out, and then this whole unit will drop out. And then when you install it, we actually want you to take the whole entire clutch assembly, and instead of putting it on here and using a clutch alignment tool, it's already aligned from the factory. So it goes on the transmission first, and then you put the transmission up, line it up, and then you put these bolts in afterwards. So anyway, we'll get these 4 out and then drop this thing down and take a look at it. Alright, so here's the old assembly out of the car. You can see this kind of looks like a automatic transmission torque converter, and then it's basically acting as the flex plate. And then this is the old clutch. This is one of those cheap eBay XTD clutches. And what's kind of ignorant about this clutch, it's not a big deal because you replace everything anyway, but it's riveted into that plate, so you can't even take this off and inspect the clutch or anything. I mean, I guess you could cut it off or whatever, but we're not going to waste our time doing that. And then this is the new one. Comes with all the new, this is a south bend clutch. And you can see the difference here is, you could service this if you really had to. It's got the nuts on it instead of just being riveted in. I don't really like these modular clutches that much. I'd rather just keep it the way it was. Some people say these are easier to install because you put this on the transmission first and then put the transmission up into the engine. You don't have to align the input shaft with the clutch. But with a good clutch aligning tool, you can install this assembly and have it aligned. And I've never had any trouble, very rarely have any trouble lining them up with the clutch already installed on the engine. So, I don't know. I mean, it is what it is. I don't care either way, really. But I prefer the non-modular clutch. But anyway, this is a modular one, so we'll install this on the transmission before we put it up there. And then, you know, we'll both transmission up and then line this up and bolt it to the flywheel and be done with it. So the next thing is he bought a new fork and, you know, throw out bearing stuff. So we'll put all that stuff in the transmission first, and then we'll put this on and start putting this thing back together. All right, so here's your throw out bearing. We'll have to replace that. This is the fork. You know, it goes back and forth. He actually got a new fork, so we're gonna put that in, and he got a new pivot ball. So anyway, we'll take this out, clean it up a little bit, and reinstall that stuff. And then we'll slide that hub assembly, clutch assembly over this, and then it'll be ready to go back into the car. So we will take this throw out bearing out and remove this fork and put the new stuff in and then reinstall it. All right, so I got that clutch pivot ball out. I did it kind of the redneck way. Put a vice grip on it and then put another vice grip on it, just tapped it out. You can see it's splined in there. You know, sometimes they come out pretty easy. This one was really in there, so I heated it up a little bit. I didn't go nuts with the heat, but I did get it heated up and took some pretty good hits with it. And the reason why people change these, it has a nylon end on it. I actually burnt it off when I heated it up, so you can't see it anymore. But that nylon wears out, and people attribute that to a lot of problems with getting it in gear and stuff. So anyway, he bought a new pivot ball that doesn't have the nylon on it, and it's supposed to be an updated one from Bamboo Racing or Boomba Racing or something like that. So anyway, I'll show you that, and we'll put that in and get this thing move forward with it. All right, so this is the one he got. It's Boomba Racing out of Illinois. And anyway, here it is. It's all steel. You can see there's no nylon on it. It's a pretty thick head here. And anyway, so we'll pop this back in and get the new fork on and throw out bearing. But if you're interested in changing yours out and getting rid of that nylon head, this is who you want to check out, Boomba Racing. I don't know if that's focusing real well, but it's Boomba Racing. All right, so you can see here there's splines. I don't know if you can see it, but there's splines on this, and you want to kind of turn it and line the splines up until you can feel them kind of connect. And then what I'm going to do is I got a 3/4, I believe it's 3/4. Yeah, 3/4 impact socket, and that'll go over. It goes over this ball, but it engages this bottom floor of it, so that I can tap it in. So I'll probably put a little lube on this, and then, like I said, I'll turn it until they kind of connect, and then I'll put this socket over it and drive it on in there. All right, so here's the new fork and throw out bearing installed. You want to clean this surface up on the input shaft, and then usually the clutch comes with a little bit of grease to put on there to allow this to go back and forth smoothly. But yeah, that's pretty much it. That's a new fork. I'm not sure what the difference is. It's an aftermarket fork. Here's the factory one. They look pretty similar, but anyway, now we'll put the modular clutch on and then start putting this thing back in the car. Alright, so here it is installed on the input shaft. You want to make sure it's on all the way. Just grab your fork and pull it forward. And if that moves forward, then you know it's on all the way. So get it seated all the way in there, and then you can go ahead and start putting it back up into the car. Alright, so I got it all back in there and lined up. It's bolted up. You know, it's pretty self-explanatory. You just get it up there. Sometimes you have to jack the engine up a little bit and angle your jack and all that, and get them to line up. You don't want to force anything. But normally what I do is get it lined up really close, get it pushed in real close, and then I start one bolt and then kind of work. I don't tighten it, I just make sure it's mated real good. But you get one in there so it doesn't fall. You can kind of move it around. And then, anyway, so I got it together. And I've already put all the bolts in for the clutch. And, you know, there's, there's bolts right there. There's 4 of them. And, you just rotate your crankshaft. With those, it's kind of like a torque converter where you don't want to just put one in and tie it down all the way, because what happens is, number one, the pressure plate will be uneven and then it'll bind up. So what you want to do is put it in, get it hand tight, turn the engine over, put the next one in, and do that 4 times so that's all hand tight. That way your pressure plate is, it's not being torqued on just one bolt. And once you get them all hand tight, then you can turn them back around and torque them down. But don't just put one in and tighten it, because then you're going to bind it up. So that's the only tip I have on that. And now I'll put this mount back in here, and then put this intercooler pipe and the transmission lines back on, and go from there. I'm not sure how much I'm going to show putting it back together, because it's kind of reverse of taking it out. But if things come up that I think might be helpful, I'll share it with you. But this thing is pretty much on the home stretch now. I mean, once you get the transmission up there and lined up, usually things go pretty good after that. So I still got to put a timing belt on this car, but that'll be a different video. So anyway, next thing I'll do is I'll put this mount back up here, and like I said, reattach this stuff. And you got one more bolt on this side when that mount goes up that goes to the transmission. I'll torque that down, torque down the bolt over here, and then I'll probably I might slide the axles in and just kind of be done with underneath here at that point. But we'll see. I still got to put the slave cylinder back in, stuff like that. So, like I said, if anything comes up interesting, I will film it, or just kind of show you the progress. All right, one thing I'll add, if you take your intercooler pipe off, make sure you get these clamps real tight. This is the regular, almost like a hose clamp style. I don't usually like these because they can create boost leaks. So, I mean, this car has it. I'm going to keep them on there. It's not my car. But this is usually what I would like. This is the clamp that I prefer on turbo cars. These seem to hold a lot better, especially with this, connections like this. So if you're having boost leak problems, or you're not getting the right amount of boost out of your car, always check your clamps. Maybe do a boost leak if you got like a boost leak detector. I actually made a homemade one out of PCV pipe that I use. But these are the better clamps, especially for boost applications over these. But this car already has them on there. I'm not going to mess with it. So when you do put these back on, just make sure they're real tight. All right, when you put the slave cylinder back up, there's a notch on the slave cylinder. You have to rotate this slave cylinder until it lines up. And you have to be at an angle, because it won't clear this yet until it's lined up. Once it's lined up and it's at an angle, just kind of press it down in there, and then you'll clear this. And then you press it in and then turn it back upward, and it locks it in. And then there's that plastic. You still have this you have to put in, and that kind of retains it in there. It's a plastic clip, so that goes in, and then you're done with the slave. Just goes like that. And there's a little cover that goes on right here. You put that back on, and then we'll start working on the mounts and getting this thing rolling. So I think what I'll do next is I'll put the cover on and probably work on this back mount over here, put that back on, and start jacking it up to where the transmission is supposed to be. And then we'll go back to Still got to put the axles in. We'll probably go back to the top and do a little work on there first. Alright, so I took this mount completely off, so I'm going to bolt that back on. There's 3 bolts to hold on, 15 millimeter. And then I will jack it up and line it back, you know, because this is the mount that holds the transmission up. So we'll jack it up after we get those 3 in and put this 18 back in. It's in the wheel well. And that'll put the transmission, the engine back where it's supposed to be. And then it's just a matter of axles and a few connectors and, you know, put the battery back in and stuff like that. So anyway, we'll put these 3 back in and then put this big one back in and march on. Alright, so to put these shifter cables back in, pull them up, you know, you put them in the bracket and then pull them forward as possible. And then you slide those brackets back on that we took off. I use my palm to put them back on. If you're not strong enough to do that, you can use like a long screwdriver and, you know, then tap them down. There's, you know, just as long as they're seated like they are right there. I don't know if you can see it that well. Let's see if I can. But you can see they're back on, those clamps. So basically the premise is they go on this side of the clamp, or the bracket, and they just go, they sneak in between the clamp and that cable. So, you know, once you get it lined up, you can use your palm if you're strong enough, or your fingers, or put something on top of them and drive them down. So the next thing will be to put the bushings back in here that we took out, and the circlips, and then your shift cables will be done. Alright, I'm putting the axles back in. When you put the axles back in, be careful. Guide the axle into the hole straight. Don't just jam it in there or you'll mess up your axle seals and you'll be leaking transmission fluid. Once you get it in there and kind of started, engaged, just take a hammer and just tap on it. It should go in no problem. Don't beat on it real hard. You'll mess your threads up. Usually I put the nut on there and just kind of tap it. Doesn't take much. And once those are seated, you'll feel it seat or you'll hear it. Then you can put the assembly back together, your axle nut and your ball joint, and move on to the other side. But just be careful when you put it back in. Slide it in straight. To kind of guide it in there with your other hand, and make sure you put it in straight. Otherwise, you'll mess up your seal and you'll be leaking fluid. So just a little tip on. All right, well, I think I'm going to end the video here. The axles are in. I still got to put the battery box in, the throttle body, and the air intake. The reason why I am not showing that is because his throttle body gasket has seen better days. And, of course, nobody in St. Louis has it. I got to order from Springfield. So I'm pretty much shut down until tomorrow because I can't put I don't want to put a bunch of stuff in there and bury that throttle body down in there. So I want to put the throttle body on next, and then I'd put the battery tray, battery, and air intake and be done with it. But anyway, I have to wait for this part till tomorrow. So just going to end the video here. It's pretty self-explanatory from here on anyway. This video is probably not the most in-depth or technical video, just because I didn't film every single thing and I'm kind of in a hurry, but gives you a general idea of what it takes. These aren't too bad. The biggest thing about these is I'm not a big fan of those modular clutches. I mean, it's not that big of a deal. It slows you down a little bit, I think. But and then the power steering lines and the intercooler line, the tube that goes underneath the engine will hassle you as far as getting to the modular bolts and also putting the transmission back up in there. It's not a real big deal, but that will be a factor as far as fighting you a little bit. Other than that, it's pretty straightforward. If you've done a front-wheel drive clutch, it's all pretty straightforward from there. It's probably got about maybe 3 hours into it, and that's changing that pivot ball and fork and cleaning it up and messing with the modular clutch. I know I keep saying that, but like I said, I'm not a big fan of them, but whatever. Still got to do a timing belt on this. I'll probably film that in a separate video. But I think I'm done. It's getting dark here, and been out here messing with it, and I can't go much farther with the throttle body. It'd been nice to get it done today and then start timing belt tomorrow, but I should be able to get it all done tomorrow anyway. These timing belts aren't too hard on these. Like I said, I'll make a video on that. But anyway, that's pretty much it on taking the transmission in and out on a Srt4 03 to 05. Neon's quite a bit, a regular neon's quite a bit different. It's a little bit simpler down there. But anyway, that's it. And if you like this video and the channel, please subscribe. I'm trying to build this channel up, so I appreciate if you subscribe. And I'll see you on the next one.